Muy bien, para finalizar nuestro programa, hemos querido invitar al señor Martin Reason, Manager of Infrastructure Coordination and Urban Design Brisbane City Council, quien ha sido responsable de uno de los casos más emblemáticos de regeneración urbana, el South Bank Parklands Brisbane en Australia. Expondrá sobre la génesis del proyecto, gestión de suelo, roles públicos y privados, relación con las comunidades, diseño urbano y arquitectura, financiamiento, comercialización, implementación y también aprendizajes. El señor Reason es Bachelor en Regional and Town Planning y Master of Science and Infrastructure Management of the University of Queensland. Martin Reason es experto en planificación, proyectos de regeneración, infraestructura y diseño urbano. Ha sido asesor estratégico de la Greater London Authority, de la Reegeneración Ltd. Y de la Oficina de Desarrollo Urbano de Shenzhen en China. Ha destinado gran parte de su carrera profesional al Brisbane City Council en Australia, donde se desempeñó como Senior Urban Planner y hoy dirige la coordinación de infraestructura y diseño urbano. Desde esta posición ha participado en la definición de modelos de compensaciones de infraestructura, en el desarrollo de planes maestros de renovación urbana y su financiamiento con modelos de colaboración público-privada y en la discusión de modificaciones legislativas asociadas a temas de ciudad. Dejo entonces con ustedes al señor Martin Reason.
Okay, I just want to start by, I guess, thanking you for giving me the opportunity to come here from Australia to, I guess, share some of our experiences that we've had in urban regeneration over the last 25 years, and also to, I guess, learn from some of the experiences that you've had in the work that you've been doing here in Santiago. I would also just like to take the opportunity to thank, express my gratitude to everyone that I've met here in their patience in me not speaking Spanish. I guess I've come across from literally the other side of the world, and I'm really grateful for the hospitality I've been shown. I'm also very impressed that you're all here happily at a conference at 3:30 in the morning, so well done. Oh. Okay, so this afternoon I'll talk a little bit about, I guess, 4 key things that I've learned through regeneration in and around Brisbane, on and off over the last 25 years or so, or 20 years in my case. 4 key messages that I want to leave with you. First one is, you've got to know what you want. The second one, infrastructure is key. The third one, you have to take people with you. And the fourth one, great places are well-managed places. Now, look, by way of background, just in case some of you don't know sort of the way that Australia works and some of the governments, it is relevant to the, I guess, the conversation that we'll have this afternoon. This is Australia obviously superimposed over a map of South America, just to give you a sense of the size. It's a small continent but a large country, but what's relevant to, I guess, the conversation this afternoon is 2 key things. One is most of the population of Australia is concentrated in a very narrow sort of 200-kilometre strip around the coast, starting roughly in Brasilia and making its way around there to Buenos Aires. This is automatically moving forward, by the way, these slides, so bear with me. There's also a little bit of population concentrated on the west coast as well. Now, the second thing you need to know is that Australia there's 3 levels of government. It's a federation of states, so when you hear about Australia, it's actually the Commonwealth of Australia, with states operating within that. I come from the state of Queensland, and Brisbane, my city, is the capital of the state of Queensland. Now, all the states operate different planning systems, but primarily the federal government isn't really involved very heavily in urban policy. They do provide funding across the system, but they generally don't get involved in urban affairs. Every once in a while they do, and recently, just in the last month, our new Prime Minister has announced an interest in actually the federal government getting involved in urban affairs. The other thing about Brisbane, I guess, is that it's by far the largest local authority in Australia. In fact, I think it's the largest local authority in the Southern Hemisphere, third largest in the world. It runs all urban services in Brisbane, which is a very powerful thing in terms of governing, I guess, the city, running the urban planning system. And we have a budget roughly around about $2.5 to $3 billion American dollars that we operate every year. In terms of population and background, we've actually, Brisbane's been the, over the last 2 decades, on and off, has been either one of or has been the fastest growing urban area in the developed world, which has been a really great opportunity for us and also obviously presents challenges. That's in terms of population, and we also have had strong employment growth, and we expect that growth to continue despite the fact that we're seeing declining birth rates, declining internal immigration rates, and of course the global financial crisis. Now, the thing with Brisbane is it's been going, and Queensland generally, but Brisbane particularly, has been undergoing a bit of an economic transformation over the last sort of 30, 40 years. The economy of Queensland is very heavily based on primary industries. We're a very successful economy in terms of coal, primary industries, beef, cattle, and you know, sheep, and other primary industries. Brisbane has always been the sort of, I guess, the capital supporting that primary industry sector until relatively recently, when we've seen a transformation or a shift of our economy towards more knowledge-based services, energy and resources, education. There's a convention sort of visitor or tourism economy that's growing, and also creative and digital. Now, the reason this is critical to urban renewal is because, like many of the speakers have spoken about today, I very strongly believe that the success of cities and the success of city economies really comes down to if you can achieve densification, not just high-density residential precincts or high-density employment precincts, but high-density mixed-use precincts, which generate economic activity and creative energy within your cities. And we've actually been moving. Last year was actually the first time in a very long time that we've actually had more apartments built in Brisbane than houses. Now, Brisbane's always struggled with this, and the reason why our urban renewal program is important is because Brisbane is, it's got a very high density core, and it's a very, very small sort of central, what we call central business district, which is it's a combination of all types of uses, cultural, commercial, etc. But it has a very low density sort of suburban character immediately outside of that core. It doesn't have a transitional zone. It just goes immediately from high density sort of 300-metre high buildings straight out into detached houses on sort of 500 to 1,000 square metre lots. And that actually travels all the way from Noosa in the north down to Gold Coast in the south. And that effectively creates a 200-kilometre city in a narrow strip along the coast, which not only obviously causes a lot of the urban management problems that we've talked about and the transportation problems that some of the panellists have talked about today, but it also creates headwinds in terms of trying to create that high density creative economy that we've also spoken about. Fortunately, over the last sort of 20 years or so, Brisbane's identified a number of urban renewal precincts very close to its CBD. There are a number of large brownfield sites or I guess greyfield sites around the inner urban core, and over time there's been a number of urban renewal programs have sort of been rolled out by at least two levels of government and private sector organisations to sort of amalgamate into a very large, effectively a single urban regeneration project that's been going on for those 2 decades. Just quickly, I guess there are two main, or I guess 3 main organisations involved in running urban renewal in Brisbane. The first one is the Brisbane City Council, obviously my organisation. We do a lot of the heavy lifting. We cover most of the inner urban areas. That's the areas identified in blue on that chart. We've been doing that now in a targeted way for, as I say, about 25 years. In the last 5 years or so, the state government, even though the state government doesn't really get involved in urban planning and direct urban infrastructure and investment per se, aligned with urban planning, they do have a special purpose vehicle for converting old, underused state government land into urban renewal precincts, and there are 4 urban renewal precincts operated by the Queensland government within the central Brisbane area. And then finally there's South Bank, which is which I'll get onto in detail towards the end of my presentation. South Bank is a a standalone organisation that has operates under its own legislation and reports, has a board which reports directly to the Premier of Queensland. So, the lessons. The first one, know what you want. The thing that we do in Brisbane City Council is we have, I guess every organisation these days has a mission statement or a vision statement. The thing in Brisbane City Council, the way that we operate is we have 8 clear goals underneath a sort of an overarching, I guess, objective, which is that we are dedicated to a better Brisbane. I'm dedicated to a better Brisbane. My team is dedicated to a better Brisbane. We have a concept we call Team Brisbane. Now, I'm not a big fan of motherhood statements, but I am a fan of everyone pulling in the same direction. When you have very limited resources and you've got a number of different agencies delivering within a concentrated area, the best way to get the best results is to know exactly what you want and have everyone lined up behind that. So our objectives are, we want an accessible, connected city. We want an active and healthy city. We need a clean, green city, excuse me. We'd like a friendly, safe city. We want a new world city, a smart, prosperous city, a vibrant, creative city, and a well-designed subtropical city. Now, these sort of sound a bit like slogans, but actually those statements are actually built into everything we do. We can't make a budget decision without running it over how it compares to those statements. I can't write a policy document that runs through the council for decision without comparing it to how it achieves the objectives that are outlined there. And to give you an idea of how that actually works, I'll sort of talk a little bit about our transport system around our urban renewal program, or around our city in general, which is supporting our urban renewal program. Brisbane's has an extremely radial transport network. It particularly runs north, south, up and down the coast, but everything in terms of public transport runs in a very narrow strip through that very small central business district core. The problem is that the urban renewal precincts that I've shown you are actually sitting sort of, 3 kilometres roughly, up to 3 kilometres outside of that central core. So there's a limited there's a limited amount of public transport access to that core, to that urban regeneration area. And we operate our current system through heavy commuter rail. We have a bus rapid transit system, quite extensive, and of course we have the standard, surface and also subterranean freight and private vehicular distribution systems. Now, that actually translates into this sort of outcome. This is the what we call our Brisbane analysis of public transport accessibility. In a nutshell, or in short, the red areas are the high level of public transport. The blue circles there are our urban renewal fringe areas, and as you can see, with the green areas being the sort of lowest level of public transport, red being the highest, we could do a lot more in terms of getting accessibility to those areas. Now, we have done a lot in terms of, sorry about this, we have done a lot in terms of improving our mass transit systems. We're augmenting the north-south system through both bus and rail services, and we're also looking at improving our metro connections east-west amongst those precincts. But when someone asks the question, how do I achieve some of the other vision statements or the other goals through this investment that we're making, where we want a smart, prosperous city, which needs the well-connected, accessible city, but what about achieving the goals of an active, healthy city or a well-designed subtropical city? We started asking ourselves, well, what would happen if we actually improve pedestrian connection from the CBD, let people get across that peninsula and actually access those urban renewal areas directly from the existing public transport that we have? What if we actually just improve the walkability of those precincts and actually improve people's ability to walk further in a more inviting environment in terms of from those existing public transport networks? Now, if you run it through those goals, you start seeing examples like this, excuse me, examples like this, where we've got a number of bridges sort of crossing the river around the CBD, and they've existed for quite some time. The bridges on the left-hand side of those images, they've been in place for a number of years, so they're built throughout the between 1900 and 2000. We started building new bridges and adding some of that public, not just public transport infrastructure, but the bike and the pedestrian infrastructure. We then went one step further and actually started building pedestrian and cycle bridges, and we've been building one of those roughly every decade over the last 20 years. We've got the bottom two photos are actually two that we've just announced as being projects that we're investigating. And what this basically does is, combined with a significant project to improve the walkability around the river, not just actually in terms of transport connection, but in terms of that well-designed subtropical city, active and healthy city, we're actually making a very attractive way for people to actually move around the city, whether it's by ferry, by walking, by cycling, and we have our bike hire scheme very similar to the one that you have here. What this is doing is actually creating it's significantly increasing the mode share towards active transport and public transport on the ferries, but it's also creating a lifestyle around Brisbane, particularly around the urban renewal precincts. And basically what we're able to do now is, a city which used to sort of have the dream of a house on a block of land in the suburbs, a very large portion of the population now has a dream of actually living in these urban renewal precincts. Second lesson is infrastructure is key. Now, a lot of people will talk about urban renewal precincts, and I come from an urban design and an infrastructure background. People often talk about the master planning, the architecture, designing to a human scale. All these things are really important. But what I'd like to talk about here is one of our significant precincts, or most successful precincts by any measure, is the inner northeastern suburbs, which that really was the first program in the early 90s. This was what it was like sort of in sort of the late 80s. A lot of sort of disused buildings, disused sort of warehouse buildings near the port, near the river, but close to the CBD. Really run down, very unattractive for developers, very unattractive for people to actually to live and work in. A master plan was done. It had all of the sort of the bells and whistles. It had the the sort of architecture and what have you. All these things are really important. It even had a light rail. But actually, despite the fact that this has been a huge success architecturally, from a lifestyle point of view, and just in terms of the image of the city and the way that the city sees itself, the real unsung heroes of this whole project, I could show you a photo now of an architect or some sort of great urbanist, but actually the unsung heroes of this project are actually these guys. These are the guys who basically have been putting the infrastructure under the ground so that the sites were prepared and ready for investors to come in and actually and take over and make some sort of decisions to actually take the risk to bring these sites on. At a time when really it was something very unusual in Brisbane, and I'd wager probably around the world, sort of late 80s and early 90s. In Brisbane we have a significant problem around flooding. Every city's got its, natural hazards. We have very much higher flood immunity standards in Brisbane for commercial and residential development now than we had for industrial development back, sort of in the early 1900s. So a lot of work needs to be done to make sure that those precincts, when they're redeveloped, they actually achieve those standards. And actually it makes it very difficult to, a lot of that area there that you can see, excuse me, you can see that's 3 kilometres from the CBD, and a lot of the urban renewal areas, because they were former riverside portlands, they're all floodable, they're all very difficult to actually convert into usable commercial or residential space. So, as an example, this was Newstead River Park. This was one of the first projects, a very large, significant piece of land right in the middle of New Farm, right on the river. That was the sort of master plan sort of 10 years ago, and it's currently under construction and almost near completion. But the critical thing with that site, that's the site there in the foreground, the vacated site. If that site had been developed without consideration of the overall precinct, particularly in terms of stormwater running down off that hill that you can see from the central business district in the background through all of that potential urban renewal area, if that site had been developed without consideration of the drainage of that area, then that area, that entire area of potential urban renewal would have been effectively sterilised from development forever, because it would have been impossible to deal with the stormwater once those tall buildings were in place. So a plan was drawn up. Basically, the 3 dots there, the lower left dot is I guess where most of the drainage is coming from. The middle dot is the area where there was no single development site. It was very fragmented, so it needed a public policy response to build the stormwater in. And then the green site is the site, the development site in Newstead River Park that I mentioned. Now, there's because I'm running out of time, I won't go into detail, but there's a very complicated tax offset scheme which basically allowed the green site, the Newstead River Park site, to develop and accommodate the cost of building that stormwater infrastructure, and then tax offsets for that. Meanwhile, in the larger dot in the middle, There's a taxation system which gets people contributing after the infrastructure has been built, basically reimbursing council and the developer for the initial infrastructure that was built, that was put in place. And that's effectively capturing the uplift that's made possible by that infrastructure that was put in place. There was obviously remediation as well. We worked with the developer to remediate a number of these sites. And finally the site was ready for construction in 2007, and this is the site basically today, almost finished. There's 1 or 2 sites to be completed. And the key message I want to leave with you on this one is that developers are taking a risk. When they go into these urban renewal areas, they are pricing in a risk. They are pricing in the risk of the infrastructure, they're pricing in the risk of the contamination. We're also then, as urban planners, asking them to push the boundaries on architecture, push the boundaries on the quality of the public realm. We're just asking too much of developers. So anything we can do to reduce those costs by reducing that risk, the better chance we've got of getting a good architectural outcome on the ground. Third lesson is you have to take people with you. Now this is something that I think we actually do quite well in Brisbane. We've been doing it for quite some time now. We've just finished our updated city centre master plan, but the key thing with this program is that over a number of years now, we've been working with the community on urban planning issues. A number of people have talked, Ken Livingston talked earlier about the idea of NIMBYism, or not in my backyard syndrome. With the greatest of respect, I know that phenomenon happens, but I don't necessarily agree that it's just about people saying they don't want it in the backyard. I actually think people have legitimate concerns when you go to them and say, we want to transform your area from being low density residential into being this high density precinct. And people say, well, hang on a second, it's affecting my lifestyle. So what we do in Brisbane City Council, wherever we can, we go to the community not with a plan, we go to them with a problem that we share with them, and we say, you know, we've got to meet this target for residential housing. We want to have high density development in this area so that, for example, your kids can afford to live in this area and not have to move further out into the fringe as they get older. We've found that when we share that problem with people, we actually get a really good response. People embrace the plan, they understand what we're trying to do, and by the time the plan is written, it's actually their plan. And so you don't get, once you arrive at the point where you're getting development applications or developers are actually wanting to build their sites, you get less of that protest or reaction against the development, and once again you're reducing that risk. Now, the reason I say I think we're doing this reasonably well in Brisbane is because we watch our cousins in Sydney and Melbourne struggling with this. I think our great advantage is the fact that we are one large council, so we don't have, you know, individual councils arguing over who has to take on the high density, etc. So in the Brisbane City plan, we had a thing called the Ideas Fiesta. Now, going out to people and just opening up a stall at a community hall on a Saturday afternoon and asking people to just come over and find out what town planning is about is not going to work, or it certainly doesn't work in our culture. What we do is actually, well, with the Ideas Fiesta, we held a series of events that were catering to a whole range of different types of people. Some of them actually look more like, I guess, outdoor music festivals. We'd close a street for a picnic, we'd actually hold an event, and then off to the side we'd have, just sort of some, boards, just sort of getting people excited about what sorts of things they might see in their city. So rather than sort of, approaching it from a, oh, unfortunately we've got to have this change, what do you think? We were actually saying, this is what your city could be like. And we found that people really got behind it. People came up with some great ideas, which we were able to incorporate into the plan. And the thing is, we don't go to people with a plan, we go to people with ideas and concepts. And so this is some of the concepts that we showed them. Once again, this is one of the concepts that fell out of well-designed subtropical city. Sort of saying to people, this is what, I think this is Albert Street. This is what Albert Street in Brisbane could look like, under this plan. But what do you think? And so what we find is by the time, as I say, by the time we actually get to the point where developers are putting forward proposals, this is expected by the community. And in fact, not only expected, but they're actually kind of excited about the prospect. The other thing we do in terms of bringing people along, this is a program that I run, it's called the Vibrant Laneways program. The Vibrant Laneways program takes underutilised, usually alleyways and things like that in the CBD, often unsafe spaces, often underutilised real estate adjoining. All we do really is just run a series of events and just keep running the events, putting in very, very small scale infrastructure, get people interested in the spaces, and then eventually the private sector will actually come on board and start actually building interesting tenancies alongside those precincts. This is one where that coffee shop is. You can see where the tilt-up door is. That was originally just basically a blank wall. That entire wall was blank. That was a storage room. We came along, put in a little bit of public art, very low expense, some seating, some lighting, and an entrepreneur basically came up with the idea of a coffee shop there. That little precinct, we put that in place around about July last year. We've already had 4 new, in a space probably about the size of, the space is probably half the size of this hall. Adjoining that space, we've now had 4 bars or restaurants open in that space, which of course, similar to this project, which is just around the corner, you put in some infrastructure. We did the lighting, but it would have just been a well-lit sort of, intersection. What actually happens is by having private sector people come along, get on board, get excited about the idea, they're actually activating the space at night time, making it interesting, exciting, and a safer place to be. So once again, it's about, Team Brisbane, getting people on board, getting them excited about the idea. Urban planning to me is change management. Once you've got people on board and you've got them excited about that idea of change, you've pretty much you've done your job. The interesting thing is when we started doing this, everyone thought that we were crazy. They didn't really understand what we were trying to do. We actually now at the point where we're effectively just becoming event managers. We're putting in very small amounts of infrastructure. This is an event where we just ran a fashion show on a Friday night in one of our laneways. And now people are just coming along to us almost constantly and asking us, can we please close down your laneway and just hold an event, put in some music? And we say no problem because we've already put in a bit of power supply, a bit of water for that to happen. And then finally on this, my latest project is an upgrade of one of our key boulevards or main boulevards in the centre of town. We're actually widening the footpath and it's a fairly major project for us, very high spec. But the critical thing on this project is we've actually, there was a traders group, we knew there would be a traders group formed as part of this project once we'd finished. We actually encouraged them to form before we started. So they're now involved in actually in the project before the design has even commenced. They'll be involved through the construction planning. They'll be involved during construction, and post-construction we'll effectively hand the keys over to them and say, go for it, this is now your space. Final message, and now on to South Bank. Great places are well-managed places. Now, there's no question in my mind that South Bank is one of the jewels in the crown of Brisbane's urban renewal process. To be clear, the South Bank Corporation is a separate entity to Brisbane City Council. I don't work for the South Bank Corporation, but Brisbane City Council has recently taken over management responsibility of the Parklands component of the South Bank Corporation. But from an urban design perspective, architectural perspective, this is an outstanding project. If you're ever in Brisbane, I encourage you to look me up and I'll take you for a walk down in South Bank. South Bank started as a sort of a leftover site from the World Exposition in 1988. It was quite a successful World Exposition, really was good for Brisbane. It sort of opened our eyes to what we could be and what the world was all about. It kind of had a false start. The first site was developed in the early 90s, 1992. It opened. Didn't really work probably as well as, well certainly not as well as the current site does. They stacked a lot of GFA on the site to basically fund the construction of the parklands. The whole development was probably a little bit fragmented and probably a little bit overdeveloped. And from what the team at South Bank tells me, they were really struggling to get development to occur on that site. 4 key things that they did in 1997, or from starting in 1997 in terms of reviewing the way they were managing and planning South Bank. The first thing they did was they recognised that South Bank needed to be a set of precincts, basically. There are 8 precincts within South Bank, and each one has its own character, its own sort of management style, and its own, effectively, component within the development plan. The other thing they did was build a piece of infrastructure called the Arbor. It's an arbor that runs basically the entire length of the site. It stitches all of the precincts together, and not only stitches the precincts together, but stitches South Bank with its adjoining precincts, because one of the things that the original master plan failed to do was actually draw in all of the cultural facilities and the significant architectural features, or monumental buildings and civic buildings that were immediately surrounding the South Bank precinct. So the South Bank Corporation area effectively stitched together the entire South Bank area, which goes beyond their initial corporation area. The other thing they did was open the entire site up to the river, not just in terms of the part that's on the river, but also right the way back through the site. And the fourth thing they did was they recognised that the road that originally was planned to sort of run as the access running through the back of the site, they saw that as an opportunity to create what they call a grand subtropical boulevard. They completely transformed the development approach to this land. It's like black and white difference to the approach. Originally, this road was going to be built over completely and was just going to be an access effectively to a car park. It is now a grand boulevard that runs right the way through and connects the site to the city and the river to the north. Now, the key thing about South Bank is about its management. We can talk about the urban design all day, but actually, to me, the critical thing that makes them successful is the fact that they manage it incredibly well. This is a photo of the pool. The pool and the sort of the beach that's been installed there. It was originally designed to accommodate 150,000 people. It now accommodates 650,000 people a year. If they weren't managing the site and the facilities and the filters and everything else incredibly well, they would not be able to do that. But it's not just about the sort of the big features of the parkland, it's actually the details. The guys tell me that every day they go through the site and do an audit of all of the, every bin, every light, every fitting in the park. They do an audit. If there's a light bulb out, they replace it immediately. If there's a bin that's been vandalised, got some graffiti on it, they will clean it immediately. So when you go to the parkland, you're guaranteed of having an extremely high quality experience in that parkland. Same thing applies to their lawn maintenance, their gardening maintenance and what have you. It's not cheap, but it's worth it. It really is. The amount of money that South Bank generates in terms of as a product or an offer that Brisbane can give, not just in terms of the parkland itself, but creating a precinct that people can travel to far outweighs the cost of actually of maintaining the park. The other thing they do is that they're constantly in contact with their customers and their community. They're always doing surveys. They're constantly evolving. It might feel like they did a master plan in 1997 and they've just applied it, but actually when you look at the detail and you stand back and look at it, they've actually been continually evolving through the entire time since that master plan was released. They offer events. The events are on a daily basis, a weekly basis. This is a marketplace that everyone knows is there every Saturday morning. When the market isn't there on a Saturday morning, the space opens up for people to do more sort of exercise and daily sort of activities within the space. They made a very brave decision. The way they manage the space, they basically they lease land for development, very long-term leases, usually sort of 99, or either 120 or 99-year leases. They made a decision on one of the key sites that was right in the middle of the park, and probably one of the biggest sites, to decrease the allowable development density, and they also maintain 65% ownership of the site. That allows them to curate the offer at the ground floor and ensure that the sorts of activities that occur on the ground floor are happening at the right times of the day and contributing to that general activity and engagement and enjoyability of the park. And also that issue of integrating between the river and back up into the other development sites. South Bank's become the key place for people to go and celebrate events in Brisbane. It's probably struggling under the weight of that. There is not a free weekend now where they don't have some major event. To a degree, it probably wasn't designed for that purpose, so that is one of the challenges they need to deal with for the future. This is Dinner en Blanc. It's, there's always a major event which also has, you have to have all of the amenities and the toilet and the cooking facilities and things like that, and they're kind of running out of space to deal with that. But because they're so, their operation is so well managed, they're able to handle that, and they're able to basically get themselves back up and running for Monday morning after a major event has occurred. It's not just about those sort of nighttime events. They also they do events that cater to all parts of the demographic. They'll try and invite families and children and what have you, people exercising, and also just people to come and just enjoy the parklands. They'll put out pieces of furniture. The idea of that furniture is not necessarily to provide furniture per se. It's to provide cues to people, ideas to people, says it's okay to come and just enjoy the parkland, use this park, it's yours. And then I guess the other thing they do is they're constantly putting little interventions, small pieces of art throughout the parkland so that every time you go down there, there's something new, something different. And they have a budget, they set that aside for that. It's very small, but they can do little things all the time that basically, I know whenever I walk through there, there's something new to look at. Constantly evolving, constantly being well managed. And I guess this is my last slide. I guess their next big challenge, aside from managing those events, as I've mentioned, is really starting to work out, because they're nearly to finish their development plan. Their next challenge is to work out how they start influencing, improving on their connection with the adjoining properties, influencing other areas surrounding it. And I'm very pleased to say they tell me they're very interested in exporting their expertise to other parts of Brisbane in terms of how to manage places well, and I guess probably other places around Australia. So. That was a very quick tour of Regeneration in Brisbane. Thank you very much.